It's recording.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to the April webinar from the National Ag Producers Data Cooperative, or NAPDC team. I'm Liz Lorang, Associate Dean for Research and Learning in the University Libraries at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and a member of the NAPDC Steering Committee, along with my colleagues Jennifer Clark, Trenton Franz, Matthew Spangler, Joe Luck, Laura Thompson, and Hongfeng Yu, many of whom are here today. Quickly, first, as a matter of housekeeping, we would ask that you keep your microphones muted during the presentation until it's time for Q&A. And then during the discussion portion, you can use the chat feature or raise hand feature and unmute at that time as well. And I'll provide a reminder of that later in the event. During the presentation portion, we would ask that you keep your cameras off so we can foreground the slides. And then if you'd like your cameras on for discussion, you're of course welcome to turn cameras on at that point. So we're delighted that you've joined us for our April webinar, about which I'll say more in just a moment. But in case this is your first time at a NAPDC event, I wanted to begin by introducing our project and our work. So we were established in late 2021, and the National Ag Producers Data Co-op is creating a blueprint for a national framework for a data repository cooperative where producers, small businesses, land-grant universities, and not-for-profit entities can store and share agricultural data, as well as develop tools for analysis that would enable producers to make more informed and enterprise-level management decisions. In order to create this blueprint, we are engaging across domains and sectors, learning about what's already happening to make agricultural data available, as well as looking at what other sectors not in the non-ag space are doing where they've been engaged in similar type efforts so that we might learn from their experience as well. Our monthly webinars are one of the ways that we're both learning from and sharing out to the community about existing efforts. So while this is our April webinar, you can go ahead and mark your calendars now for our May webinar, which will be Monday, May 23rd at 1 p.m. Central, and will feature Harvey Blackburn from the National Animal Germplasm Program. In addition to our webinars, we have a funded convening awards opportunity that is intended to enable national, regional, or domain-specific stakeholder groups to host meetings and encourage broad and diverse participation in developing that blueprint for the national framework. Anyone who is applying to or receives a convening award, we ask to contribute to one or more of the big questions that we feel are really central to that larger blueprint and framework, which include: what is your definition of a national agricultural producer data framework? How would you define framework success? What are the key challenges and opportunities for a national agricultural producer data framework? What are perceived or actual barriers to the actual engagement and use of that framework? What pilot projects are most critical for demonstrating framework utility and viability? And what similar resources or systems currently exist for your constituents or in your domain or region? All of those questions informing that larger blueprint effort. Applications for convening awards are accepted and considered on a rolling deadline through June 1st. For more information, stick a link in the chat. You can see our RFP there. But today we're pleased to have with us Diana Cox-Foster and Chris Taliga, who will share with us on the topic Plant and Pollinator Interactions, Understanding Relationships via Data at USDA, a presentation also developed with their colleague Elizabeth Hill, who will join us as a discussant during the Q&A period. Diana Cox-Foster is a research leader and entomologist at USDA ARS Pollinating Insects Research Unit, or PIRU, in Utah. PIRU focuses on the biology, management, and systematics of all bee species and is home of the U.S. National Pollinating Insect Collection and associated database. Cox-Foster's research focuses on the impact of biotic and abiotic stresses on bee health. Cox-Foster received degrees in entomology from Colorado State University and the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Cox-Foster served as a full professor at Penn State University in entomology and transitioned to USDA ARS in 2015. At USDA, Cox Foster is a member of the Pollinator Steering Committee. Chris Taliga, the United States Department of Agriculture Natural Resources Conservation Service, the National Plant Data Team. Chris Taliga is an ecologist with the National Plants Data Team in the Soil and Plant Science Division of NRCS. The National Plant Data Team focuses on plant data collection, content, quality control, integration, dissemination, and interpretation from NRCS use in conservation practices. Taliga's work focuses on pollinator and plant interactions. Taliga received degrees in environmental science from the University of Iowa and natural resource stewardship with an emphasis on ecological restoration from Colorado State University. Taliga served as NRCS National Ecologist and transitioned to the Plants Data Team in 2020. At USDA, Taliga is a co-leader of the USDA Pollinator, Forage, and Habitat Sub-Work Group. And discussant Elizabeth Izzy Hill is the USDA Honeybee and Pollinator Research Coordinator in the Office of the Chief Scientist for USDA. In their presentation today, we will hear about how USDA is interlinking several data platforms with information on plant-pollinator interactions to provide insights on forage, habitat, and nutrition for pollinators. To interlink pollinator and plant data, USDA's Agricultural Research Service, or ARS, is coordinating with USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, and the Office of the Chief Scientist. USDA ARS Pollinating Insect Research Unit houses the National Pollinating Insect Collection and associated database with plant-pollinator interactions. This database and others are being pulled into the ARS Partnership for Data Innovation Pollinator Data Portal and the USDA NRCS Plants Database. The NRCS Plants Database provides information about vascular plants, mosses, liverworts, hornworts, and lichens. NRCS is redesigning the plants database to include tabs listing bee species known to visit and nutritional composition of nectar pollen for each plant species. To coordinate efforts for national native bee monitoring via federal and non-federal entities, a U.S. National Native Bee Monitoring Research Coordination Network has 5 priorities: defining scope, aims, and cost of a monitoring program, improving national capacity in bee taxonomy and systematics, gathering and cataloging data that are standardized, accessible, and sustainable, identifying core survey methods, and prioritizing taxa to monitor, and prioritizing geographic areas to be monitored. See some exciting connections between the work that we'll hear more about now and the effort of the NAPDC project. So with that, Diana and Chris, I will turn things over to you. You're welcome to share questions in the chat during the course of the presentation, though we will hold the questions until the Q&A portion, but I'll make sure that we do come back to them. So welcome and thank you.
Thanks for the invitation to join you today and to present on our efforts. We're quite excited, and Chris and Izzy likewise share my enthusiasm, and hopefully we'll give you a chance to give us some feedback too as we go along. So as you know, across the United States, we have a broad diversity in different habitats and different agricultural systems. In these systems, the plants and the pollinators are key to the way of life that we have. So just to remind you that there is a tremendous diversity that we're seeing. Okay. USDA's mission is to serve, of course, all Americans and provide effective, innovative, science-based public policy leadership in agriculture, food and nutrition, natural resource protection and management, and rural development. And this is a commitment to deliver equitable and climate smart opportunities that inspire and help America thrive. So this is very applicable to your group and what you're striving to do. It was recognized many years ago that healthy pollinators are essential for productivity of agriculture and natural ecosystems via the role in plant reproduction. So it's mandated by legislation in 2018 in the Farm Bill to include a USDA pollinator coordination. And through that, we have developed strategic pollinator research priorities, coordinating within the different agencies within USDA and amongst other federal groups, and also non-federal groups as well. So we do have several land grant universities that partner with us in helping to develop these priorities and giving feedback annually. For plant pollinator interactions, we have a challenge. There's over 4,000 different species of bees and many other pollinators in the United States and North America. And then also accompanying this, there are over 38,000 plant species that are found in agriculture and natural ecosystems. So our biggest challenge is to figure out what are the interactions of the pollinators with the plant species, and also to understand more where they're all located. We have two databases that we're beginning to fuse together to help understand these interactions. One is with a database associated with the U.S. National Pollinating Insect Collection. This is located here in Logan, Utah, where I'm at. And it's one of the largest bee collections in the world with over 1.8 million specimens. And the data for many of the individual specimens includes plant associations. We also have the plants database, which many of you are probably familiar with. This includes the standardized information for a wide variety of different types of plants and is one of the most widely utilized websites in the federal government with over 12 million views annually. For both of these databases, we utilize what are called the Darwin Core Standards that are for categorizing biodiversity. And it's what enables us to link the two databases together. For our National Pollinating Insect Collection, as I mentioned, we have over 1.8 million specimens. These have worldwide coverage, but the focus is on the United States and specifically on the Western United States and Southwest. It might come to a surprise to learn that the greatest diversity in bee species is actually found in the Southwestern United States. And we know that there are many undescribed species that still are out there, and we don't understand where a lot of the bees are in different habitats that haven't yet been studied. In our database, we have almost 800,000 records, so not all the specimens are captured yet into the database. And when we capture an insect specimen, as shown down in the bottom right corner picture here, we give that specimen a unique number and a matrix code that connects back to the database. And for that specimen, we give its fully identified name, the collector, who made the collector and who did the identification. They may be separate. The sex of the bee, because there are males and females, may look very different from one another. The collection date and also GPS coordinates. We also record date and time. Some bees are active in the morning, others tend to be more diurnal. Many of the solitary bees that we have in the United States may only be found a very short period of time out visiting flowers as adults. The rest of the life cycle spent as immatures. We also record on there the plant associations and taking the plant names from the plants database. We have additional data also that's in the database, the method of collection, how were they obtained, the link to herbarium specimens, parasitization data, nesting information, genetic data, etc. For many of our specimens, we also have genomic data, sequences from genomes, ultra-conserved elements, barcodes, or macrosatellite data. USDA has recently, and with land grant universities, were given monies to sequence an additional 100 species of bees in the United States to get a reference genomes for those of you. This genomic data can be used for population genetics and also figuring out where a bee originated. We also have high density images shown in the lower left-hand corner. These are XYZ composite images that let you zoom in on particular characters. We have slides for the pollen that were taken from the bees to figure out what plant species they're visiting, and as well recording the publications for that specimen back to the database. We're moving efforts to take the database to move it in a more publicly accessible format and create software to capture collection data in the field. There's data for some of our specimens that is protected because it deals with endangered species, or that the data is owned by National Park Service or private corporations. For the native bees, we're also developing a national native bee monitoring program. So we know that there's at least 4,000 endemic native bees in the continental United States, but we don't know exactly where they are or what the distributions are. So we need to try to build up our information to learn more about their populations and their health and how to protect them. So we do have established a federal native bee monitoring task force. This pulls expertise across multiple federal agencies and many different departments. And there is a funded U.S. National Native Bee Monitoring Research Coordination Network. It's funded through NIFA. And this is coordinating efforts for both federal and non-federal entities. Many of the land grant agencies or universities participate in this, as well as NGOs. And so part of this effort here is also to figure out how to move it forward, but how to gather and catalog data that are standardized, accessible, and sustainable, and how to do it in a way without harming the native bee populations themselves. So this is currently in development and being moved forward. I'm going to let Chris take over now for the rest of the presentation here.
Thank you, Diana. Really appreciate that. I'm going to provide a brief overview of the plants database and then look at some of the modernization efforts that we're undertaking. So as a brief overview, the plants database is internationally recognized and was originally developed in the 1960s as a means to use and maintain standardized plant list of names useful to the present, the preparation of technical documents, handbooks, soil surveys, and providing a common language across government entities, as well as for use within government for conservation practice standards and other scientific documents. So the list was developed and maintained symbols associated with each plant species and accepted scientific and common names for plants and distribution information. In the early 90s, the plants database was launched on the World Wide Web and was one of the first very large government-wide databases to have a web access. Since the 1990s, the database has been utilized widely by a variety of government and private entities and has grown in complexity tremendously. The database provides standardized information for individual species, giving characteristics, names, and taxonomy for 28,000 plant species in North America, north of Mexico, and US and its territories. Morphology and physiology information for about 2,000 of those plant species, and legal status and distribution and nativity for most all of the land plants. It is based on vetted and verified distribution information and current taxonomic status. And you can see here below how to access the website. Next slide, please. While the database has been on the web since the 1990s, there really wasn't a full-scale modernization effort until recently. In 2020, the modernization effort went underway and we brought the plants database up to current web standards. And as part of that, we're also adding additional information to the database, including a tab for pollinator plant interactions, where we're working with other governmental agencies, other databases, peer-reviewed scientific literature to integrate additional vetted data into our plants database to provide state-level distribution for pollinator visitor interactions and nutritional composition of pollen and the character for each of the plant species, so that plant recommendations and conservation efforts can be based on actual nutritional content, actual nutritional content of pollen associated to conservation species important for pollinators. We are developing this process through collaborations with ARS, who is in the process of analyzing pollen for lipids, proteins, fatty acids, and amino acids. We're also looking at modernizing the web services applications of this web page so that search engines are optimized and access to the general public is optimized. This integration of plant pollinator information is beyond our efforts with other collaborators and other governmental databases. It really looks at accessing ArcGIS-based climate modeling efforts so that we can begin to track on a spatial level changes in the distribution of bees and also in the distribution of plant species. These types of changes can help us develop predictive models that look at changes in characteristics such as phenological characteristics of bloom time, first bud burst, all sorts of important phenological data that are relevant to plant reproduction and plant distribution for our conservation efforts. And so the goal is this integration, this broader integration and broader look at the effects of plant pollinator changes over time will allow us to develop early detection mechanisms for changes that affect plant reproduction and pollinator forage in order to offer assistance and conservation development related to agricultural systems that are reliant on these plant products and the pollinators as well. So in summary, our goal by this collaboration and integration of data sets is to develop a very rich repository of data for plant pollinator interactions, for the benefits pollinators provide on agricultural systems, and then the climatic impacts on bee and plant species. And we are excited about this collaborative efforts as we feel this is a path to ensure the protection of rich, diverse, flourishing habitats in both the agricultural systems and natural ecosystems. These efforts are wide-ranging with much collaboration at play, and in particular, Cynthia Parr with the USDA National Agricultural Library, who's Assistant Chief Data Officer with USDA ARS, has been integral in this data development process. Terry Griswold, Harold Eichert, who are, and other researchers working with Diana Cox-Foster at the USDA ARS Pollinating Insect Unit. Gary Moore is USDA NRCS Plants Data Team leader, and other scientists that work for the plants data team, and Gloria DeGrandi Hoffman, and fellow scientists at the USDA Carl Hayden Bee Lab, Mike Buser with USDA ARS Partnership for Data Innovation, Ron Sequeira, USDA GIS Coordinator with the Office of the Chief Information Officer, the US Geological Survey, collaborators Nick Balfour with University of Sussex, and many, many others have been integral in coordinating the collaboration of this multi-agency, inter and interagency effort to develop data-rich information related to pollinator and plant interactions.
So we'd like to thank everyone for listening, and we'd be glad to answer questions or open it up to a discussion. So learning more from you, what you think, how this might benefit you, or what you would like to see us add in the future potentially.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Diana and Chris, and a round of virtual applause for you and for the teams who are behind all of this work. Thank you. And I'll pause for a moment to see who wants to ask the first question. You are welcome. So at this time, welcome to turn your cameras on if you'd like. And also to ask questions, you can type them in the chat. I think we're a small enough group. If you feel more comfortable using the raise hand feature, you can. Otherwise, I do think we're small enough that if you'd simply like to unmute and ask your question, you can do that as well. So I'll wait for a moment to see who will be brave and ask the first question. Oh, Jennifer, I see a hand.
I figured I'd set a good example and raise my hand. So that was a great presentation. This is such an interesting project. The one thing I wanted to ask was what you see as the benefit for producers from this project, or even potential benefit. You know, what they could learn, and also how they could contribute to your efforts. So kind of both ways.
So as you may know, bees are essential pollinators for several agricultural crops. So producers who are depending upon pollination services for their yield, this data will hopefully allow them to get a better idea on what the supply of the bees will be, and also how they might be able to support those populations. So planting pollinator strips to support the bees, but also provide habitat for natural enemies would be important. And even for producers who are animal producers, understanding that we need bees for pollination of alfalfa seed crops, et cetera, may be important. There's also new data coming out for crops like cotton, showing that with pollination, you get added lint in seed production from the cotton. So I think there's still lots to be understood of what the value of pollinators will be for a lot of the different agricultural systems and also natural ecosystems. Izzy, do you want to add anything in that?
Sure. I mean, essentially, this is part of, there's many nodes of work going on at USDA, and this is one part of a larger puzzle of data integration across pollinator questions. And so really, no matter which part of this you look at, we're looking at optimization questions. So as Diana was saying, you know, if you do have a better understanding of what types of pollinators are near your fields, you can be planning specifically to support those types of pollinators, which can help you with optimal yields. It can help you with ensuring optimal nutrition for those specific bees. And of course, there's many other linkages here where we can take this. Commonly, we almost always begin talking about climatic stress and how that might impact specific pollinator species, pollinator species, but specifically plant species that they depend on for forage. So, to even begin to broach a question like that, you have to have the foundational understanding of plant pollinator interactions, and also having that, geospatial component to it to know where it's occurring, so that we can begin to come up with the modeling and ultimately decision tools so that we can be making these informed next steps on how to address these wicked problems, which again, climate stress is just one of many. We've got all sorts of other issues, both for plants and for pollinators. And so this will just help us in understanding this incredibly unique relationship, of the evolution of plants alongside insects, which you don't see often, right? So it's somewhat unique, and we need to understand this unique relationship better than we do currently. And this effort to combine data sets is going to be, it's really going to be foundational in helping us do that.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a couple of questions. The first is, as you're talking about integration and combining data sets, is that an integration of the data sort of fundamentally, so that they exist in the same space, and they're sort of integrated in terms of all of the underlying infrastructure, or is the integration more kind of at the analysis end, where it's bringing the data together and it's in the analysis that they're integrated? And sort of, is that happen where, maybe the question sort of, where is the integration happening, or is it all of those levels?
So I'll ask Chris to help address this, but we're basically allowing the two databases to talk to each other and to share that information across there.
The integration,
Yeah,
sorry, Diana.
go ahead.
The integration efforts will allow users to access the information through multiple access points. One access point may be the National Pollinating Insect Collection. Another access point may be the plants database. But the important component from this data integration is to allow users to access the information across multiple areas and in multiple levels. One, to promote research, but two, to promote data access from potential users. And those users can include the research community, but also conservation professionals and farmers and ranchers interested in having access to this data.
So I suppose a follow-on, I was really interested in what you said about the data that might be public, data that is private, and data that may be protected. And I was thinking of those as three different categories of information. And I wonder if you might just talk a little bit more about those different categories of data, or if there are others where you're having to make choices about who has access to what, and then how you're administering that if there are different types of access to data.
Diana, I can go ahead.
So I think this primarily relates back to the National Pollinating Insect Collection, that we have performed bee surveys for a variety of national parks. And so for that data, it can be released eventually, but it'll be taken out to a county-wide level. You won't be able to tell exactly where in the park we found a particular bee species. And the reason for that is that some of our bees are obligate pollinators for endangered plant species. And we want to protect both the plant and the bees by not letting you track down exactly where they're occurring. Because there are people out there who would want to collect, rare cactus and then sell for lots of money. We'd also have data that we've worked with different corporations, either private ranches, very large ranch in Montana, for instance, or also like Bayer Chemical Company that we've helped them with surveys. And so that data they own and we don't have access to. So it's a private data. If they give us permission, then we can make it available.
Within the plants database, we do note threatened and endangered plant species as well. And for just what Diana was saying, the protection of the plant, but also the protection of the private lands where the species occur, we only provide county level data. And so we may have the exact location information in the background, but that is not a public facing data set that we share.
So I was curious on that point about how you make decisions about what data to share and what data not to share. Is it because of what you perceive as information that may not be appropriate to share, or is it the request of submitters to not share it? I'm just curious about how you work through that process of deciding what should be open to the public and what needs to be protected.
For the plants database, the process is simpler because we provide all plant data on a county level. So there isn't an individual decision point per species. So all plant species that are noted on the plants database are provided by county level distribution. It's a bit more complicated when you're looking at the insect data, and I'll let Diana address that.
Yeah, so for some of our surveys that we've been asked to perform, there's an official agreement set up. So like with the national parks, and those specimens are actually owned by them, and that data is owned by the national parks. And we provide yearly accountability for where that specimen's located in our collection, and it's still existing there. So to release that data, we have to get permission from the national parks. And some of that has been released. For instance, Pinnacles National Park in California. One of our scientists, Terry Griswold, has done surveys now going back over like 20 years, I think. So when the publications are out, so he's published on the research, then he does make those records publicly available with the agreement of the national park. Yeah. So it comes down to the agreement. What was the agreement when that specimen came to our collection and navigating it that way? Yeah.
Thank you.
Hannah, you have a question?
Hi, thanks, Liz. My name is Hannah Gaines Day. I'm a research scientist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I was just wondering if there is a way for researchers to contribute data to this effort. So, if we have a bunch of different projects in our lab, and so we may have mostly from Wisconsin, but data on bumblebee species visiting different prairie flowers and different bee species visiting different crop plants around the state. Is there a way for that data to be contributed to this effort, or is it mostly you're pulling from, like Diana just mentioned, that if there's a published study, that data can be contributed?
I'll let Chris answer that one.
We are definitely accepting data from vetted sources, and it sounds like your source would be highly vetted. So if you would like to be in contact, I will put my email in the chat But we are definitely accepting data from vetted sources, and then we will provide, of course, a citation for the source of that data. So I'm
Okay.
just going to add my email in the chat box.
Okay, so maybe it could be the kind of thing like, once the data is published, we can also submit the data to you guys as well, so that.
That would be great.
Okay.
Yeah,
great.
that would save us a little bit of time from combing through the published scientific information that's out there. And so I would definitely make sure that you're not providing us with any data prior to when you are wanting to have that information released.
Sure. Yep. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris, can you say a little bit more at this point what the sort of process then is like for individuals to contribute data? It sounds like is it kind of case by case basis at this point, or do the individuals contribute directly into the database, or it comes through and is mediated by someone? What's the process for user contributed data?
We're developing that process as we speak. The main thing that we would do is, if we receive data regarding insects accessing plant species, is that we would ensure that the plant species that are noted are the current taxonomic association is vetted, and so there really isn't a formalized process of what the data structure should look like, because the information that we are developing is going into a data vault that provides data on the insect, on the plant species, on the location of the interaction, on the type of interaction. And, the main thing is to vet the identity of the insect species. And obviously also the identity of the plant species. So any photographs and additional information is useful in that process.
So in the identification of the bees, several of our scientists are working on methods to help facilitate others to make good taxonomic identifications. So Michael Brandstetter is a molecular systematist, and so he is creating a library of metabarcode sequences for identified bee species that if people, when they're doing collections, gain that DNA sequences for their bees, they can have good confidence to say they're identifying it. We're also working with Brian Spiesman at Kansas State University to hopefully use artificial intelligence to identify photographs of pin specimens. And Brian hopes that that could be applied to bees actually visiting flowers as well. So the biggest obstacle right now for working on bees is the lack of good taxonomic experts that have time to make identifications. So we're trying to help facilitate that as we go forward. And the new work that's being done on bee genomics as well for this 100 species, I think will be quite useful for researchers out there too, wanting to do more work on looking at stressors or understanding populations, et cetera, in bees that they have. Izzy, should we talk about the mapping of floral bloom? Do you want?
Sure. Which component of it? Because there's a couple of parts.
Yeah, so there's several things going on. So one part here with other units is we're hoping to go from floral surveys to drone imaging to getting it out to satellite imaging to actually create mapping of floral blooms and to have that tie into the climate models as well. And so would help commercial beekeepers as well as those that are concerned about climate change understand what the impacts are. And then I'll let Issy pick up on the other aspects that are going on.
Sure. And so just to add to that, what's exciting is that the Agricultural Research Service, they have a new group called SciNet, which is for supercomputing, and one of their groups, subgroups within it. So these are all postdocs that come, and they're all amazing with data science and related initiatives. So one of them is specifically doing what Diana mentioned, which is using unmanned drones to help with aerial imaging that is then compared with what we're getting from satellite imagery. So it's really quite reliable. And so long-term, what we're hoping is that, especially for USDA investments in land conservation, it may be through our Farm Service Agency, our Natural Resource Conservation Service, how can we be using this information to see what types of intentional habitat installations are successful, and have this be an adaptive management system where we can take that information, assess it, see what worked, what didn't, see what variables were influencing its success, really getting into some nice multivariate analyses. And, again, using that information to update what we do in the next year, and using that information to help inform, for example, our commercial seed producers for conservation seed, because Chris can talk to you for hours about the fluctuations in that specific market where, everyone's just chasing whatever the most expensive seed is, because they have literally no information to work off of in terms of making optimal decisions on what to be producing for the next year or the year after. So we're just trying to really increase the transparency throughout this entire system, which can partially be done through some of these new technologies, as Diana mentioned, such as with better remote sensing and aerial photography, but also with some deep dives on the social science side of the equation, and working with, again, some of the folks in industry to tease this out. And so this all comes again back to that base understanding of plant. We see this again as very foundational, and pursuing these innovative big ideas is, the building blocks of, what pollinator plant interactions exist where. And we need to know that before we can even begin to have these conversations. I mean, we could, but they wouldn't be informed. And we're just trying to make this as efficient a process, and think about the order of operations as much as we can. And Chris may have something to add. She works a lot on this.
You covered it really great. I thank you for that overview. It was very, very good.
So I had a question about, you were talking about the linking to the postdocs and SciNet and getting them to start, I would assume, doing some analytics based on the data that you've collected. So things like you said about, adaptive management and trying to follow some of the blooms. How do they interact with the data in the databases, right? So are they getting access on the back end to the data that's available? I'm just trying to understand how to link, or if you've had any experience, with linking your databases and the data that's available to the analytical side, right? To enable people to answer some interesting questions with the data that's available.
One thing that has really been a binding force of bringing us all together is that there are so many disparate efforts going on in so many sectors that you don't even really know all of the data sources and who's linking to what. And this is really a major step forward in just the plant information and pollinator information within our within our own sector in USDA and some other governmental folks. But, you know, the question was really telling earlier from University of Wisconsin researcher that integration currently really doesn't exist. That's what we're striving for.
Okay, yeah, that's exactly right. Yep.
And for our scientists, having the ability to link into the tools from Esri for the ArcGIS analysis and to go backwards and forwards in terms of climate change and looking at what was done in the past versus predicting the future, they see that as a major benefit. So we're really excited about it. So even though our collection is somewhat static, you know, it's not, it is, we are using that information there to help build upon and also add to as we go forward.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
But just to emphasize, we're able to go back and extract DNA from some of the specimens. They're up to 100 years old. And so we are going to be able to get population genetic information or information on changes in species over time.
And with the recent effort to scan most herbarium label specimens in the United States, we are looking at also accessing the historic information on plant specimens when they were blooming and how those blooming dates have changed over the last 100 years, in particular, blooming and seed set times.
Hannah.
Yeah, I had one other question. For the creating the distribution map for pollinators in the US, is there any use for data like pan trapping data that doesn't have the floral association, but has a species identification for a bee and a location?
Yes, so there is an effort through the Research Coordination Network for the native bee monitoring to figure out how to compile all that data. So taking pan trap data or vein trap data and roll it in as well. So yeah, so that's it's moving forward. And they have some, they have a website for the native bee Research Coordination Network. If you Google for it, you'll find it, Hollis Woodward.
Okay.
And there's some great presentations on there that have been recorded and different blogs. So the native bee monitoring effort itself hasn't yet been initiated. Hopefully there would be funding at some point in time to help move it forward, but it will require efforts of not only federal government agencies across many departments, but also land grant universities and NGOs to help give us a really solid background on what the status of pollinators are.
Thanks.
Yeah, I don't know if you're already connected with this group, so if you are, just ignore me. But there's the Ag Biodata Consortium that's USDA and also covers a lot of the genetics and genomics databases in agriculture. They also have a research coordination network. And they've been, I know that Cynthia Parr is aware of it, but they're also addressing some of these challenges with federation and connecting databases and trying to meet, you know, fair standards for, so it's just another resource because they're having similar challenges.
Yeah, so Cindy Parr is a major
Yep.
player in what we're doing and helping to guide our steps forward. Yeah, so she actually pulled us over into the international, the IGAD.
Yeah, and the IGAD. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so one thing that I'm looking at this ag bio data site. So one place I know there's overlap, for example, is the I5K. So the
Right.
genome, the 100 genomic, that whole effort, that's part of the I5K, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It just the comment about how everyone, there's lots of groups trying to work in this space and making their data more available and
Mhm.
usable to the community. And so it's always good to just keep your eye on what everyone else is doing. You never know what you might learn.
Yes,
It's
definitely.
something new like every day, right?
I know,
It's-
exactly.
We try, we strive, and we think we know it all,
Yep.
and then we don't.
Yeah, exactly.
There are questions that I sort of promised an opportunity to our presenters to ask questions of whether it's the NAPDC team or others in attendance that may be informing for your work. So certainly if you have any questions for us, I would also be interested in hearing from either our presenters or anyone in attendance, right? Things that you think that the NAPDC team should make sure we're accounting for in a framework blueprint, and with making no assumptions that we've thought about what's on your mind. Back to the point we were just discussing.
Does he have any thoughts?
I do, and this might be going down a rabbit hole we don't need to, and Chris is probably rolling her eyes at me, but I just want to put in a shameless plug. And it's been a real eureka moment the day that everyone figured out, at least in our team, the value of thinking about these problems at a plant species level, and not just for pollinators, like so many ag problems. That's the common denominator, is what kind of information can we be tracking on a plant species level? And everything has just fallen in place in terms of organization and working across all the silos and mission areas. Like everyone can speak that language, and it's been so helpful. So, I mean, we've talked today about the plant pollinator interactions, but we're also talking about, climate and plant interactions, and carbon and plant interactions, and nutrition and plants, and all these things that you can track by plant species. And it was just like a light bulb went off for so many of us at the same time when these conversations started happening. And so I think you're just seeing the beginnings of this plants database, really being a hub for not just pollinators, but all sorts of information in the ag world, because it's all tied to that. Even livestock, it doesn't matter. It's going to tie to it somehow. And it's already built out. It's a beautiful repository. It's, everything on there. I took hort classes. It was the only online tool we were allowed to use because 6 botanists review everything that goes up there. So it's like a dream database. It's accurate, it's robust, and the folks who are running it are, pretty game for figuring out ways to utilize it and make it of most value, and keep track of all these characteristics and relationships that matter. So I just want to put that out there, because I'm trying to help, especially in USDA, help people frame their thoughts around that concept, because I think it just greases the wheels for conversations in a way that I have not seen in the 15 years I've worked in government. Just putting that out there.
No, that's really interesting, because I think your observation that plant scientists think species is absolutely correct, that they identify with specific species. And so approaching it from that, and then also enabling them to make links across species is also something that they're very interested in. So they're very sort of species centric, but then they're interested in any ways that they can connect across species if it leads to, biological insights, because they're aware that, there are ways that species interact with each other, even if it's just at the level of, doing rotations in agricultural fields, right? That there is a real value to that. So I think enabling them to connect across species is really a good way to approach it.
Yeah. So one thing I'd just like to pull out there, this part about adding the nutritional value of plant pollen, why that's so important. And many of you may already know this, that not all pollen's created equal, that there are definitely pollens from different plants have different protein profiles, amino acids, fatty acid profiles. So even things like omega-3, omega-6 fatty acids play a major role in bee health. So much like for our own. So that's why having that information into the plants database will be really crucial for helping those figure out what is an ideal pollinator mix to go out to support pollinators or bee health. And hopefully also offer benefit for other natural enemies of pests out there too. So those pollens right now are being collected from the plant itself whenever we can. And I'm really excited about what that information, what potential there is for it.
Yeah, nutritional profiles. And I think also that gives you the opportunity to not only link to bee health and pollinator health, but potentially human health. I mean, as you've mentioned, right? It's you know that this kind of varied diet is important for everyone. So
Yeah, Jennifer, it's so funny you brought, I just today had our nutritional coordinator for human nutrition reach out specifically. And I actually have done a little bit of research into when I was, it's a long story, but I've done some unpublished research on what the nutritional value is of pollinator plants. And there are certain nutrients like lycopene and certain vitamins that you can only get from pollinated plants. So that's of importance. I mean, another level to this is understanding how human nutrition, the nutrition of plants for human consumption are affected by stressors like climate. And yet again, it comes back to this plants database. You could track that.
Right.
We actually have other databases on plant nutrition that would be so easily integrated with plants, you know? So again, it comes back to this plant species specific database and what are all the nodes and, you know, one-offs that can, with a, you know, a little data dictionary and an API, like you could do some magic real fast in terms of, you know, building out our understanding of these relationships and, you know, causal factors that drive, you know, things like declines in human nutrition or pollen or bee nutrition. It's an exciting time right now.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much for your presentation. This was just, it's fascinating.
Great.
So I'm crazily scribbling notes because, you know, we want to make sure that we put some of the sites that you're mentioning and the resources also on our webpage so people can find them, find links to the RCN and the different databases, because it's also important that we're promoting those resources.
Great. We're glad it's hopefully a two-way street here. So I encourage you all to reach out to myself, Chris, or Izzy if you have questions or just want to discuss things in more detail.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time today and your generosity in sharing what you've done and for future work. We, as Jennifer was saying, we will share the information on our website. We do also have a listserv for the project, so we can be good about sharing directly with you as well. But if you're interested in staying kind of on top of what the NAPDC project is doing, upcoming webinars, we'll make sure to share that listserv information with you as well. But this was a terrific webinar and did, I think, just the thing we needed it to do, which was to show how from something that is both specific, also generalizable, and immediately begins to connect in really significant ways, both about sort of thinking about data abstractly as well as the outcomes that we want when we begin to connect all of these pieces. So thank you so much, and we'll look forward to future conversations, and just really appreciate your time and generosity in sharing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you all in May. Okay.
All right. Bye.